I found out I owned the sky the same week my grandfather's lawyer handed me a leather folder stuffed with documents that smelled like dust and old cigars. My name is Trevor Roswell, and I'm a 32-year-old software developer who was supposed to inherit a modest savings account and maybe some fishing gear. Instead, I got something that would turn 3 entire neighborhoods in Phoenix, Arizona, into my personal battlefield. The lawyer, a thin man named Gerald with wire-rimmed glasses, had explained it in legal jargon that made my head spin. Back in 1947, my great-grandfather had been a real estate speculator with a vision that nobody understood. He'd purchased something called transferable development rights from the county when Phoenix was still dusty ranch land. These weren't just any development rights. They were air rights, specifically, the rights to build vertically above certain parcels of land that later became 3 different housing developments. Somehow, through a series of legal oversights, corporate bankruptcies, and county record-keeping disasters, nobody had ever challenged or dissolved these rights. They'd passed from my great-grandfather to my grandfather, and now to me. The 3 developments were Saguaro Heights, Desert Bloom Estates, and Pinnacle Ridge. All 3 were now governed by homeowner associations. All 3 were currently trying to approve major construction projects to add 2nd and 3rd stories to their community centers and clubhouses, and all 3 needed my signature to do it. I spent the first 2 days after that meeting thinking Gerald was pranking me. I researched air rights, talked to 2 different real estate attorneys, and even called the Maricopa County Recorder's office. Everything checked out. The rights were real, properly filed, and legally binding. I owned the air above every single building in those 3 communities, from ground level to whatever height the county would allow. Nobody could build up without my permission. The letters started arriving on day 4. The first one came from Saguaro Heights, signed by someone named Sharon Patterson, HOA president. The letter was polite but firm, requesting that I attend their next board meeting to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement regarding certain outdated property rights. I called Gerald, who laughed and told me to go see what they wanted. The Saguaro Heights Community Center was a single-story adobe-style building with a terracotta roof and desert landscaping that probably cost more than my car. I arrived at 6 in the evening, wearing jeans and a button-up shirt because I didn't own anything fancier. The parking lot was full of expensive SUVs and luxury sedans. I suddenly felt like I was walking into a corporate negotiation wearing a Halloween costume. Inside, the meeting room had about 30 residents seated in folding chairs facing a long table where 5 board members sat. Sharon Patterson was exactly what I expected. Mid-50s, blonde hair and a severe bob, designer glasses, and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. She gestured for me to take a seat in the front row. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sharon announced once the meeting started, "we have a special guest tonight. Trevor Roswell has graciously agreed to join us to discuss the air rights situation that's affecting our community center expansion project." I raised my hand slightly. "I actually didn't agree to anything. I just showed up to hear what you wanted to say." Sharon's smile tightened. "Of course. Well, Trevor, as you may know, our community has been planning to add a 2nd story to this building for the past 18 months. We've secured funding through special assessments, hired architects, and obtained all necessary county permits. However, we've recently discovered that your grandfather filed certain archaic claims that technically require your approval before we can proceed." "They're not claims," I said. "They're legally binding air rights, and they're not archaic. They're active." A man in the front row wearing a polo shirt with a popped collar leaned forward. "This is ridiculous. Those rights shouldn't even be valid anymore. The land has changed hands dozens of times." "The land, yes," I said, "but the air rights were separate and transferable. My great-grandfather made sure of that." Sharon held up her hand to quiet the murmuring crowd. "Trevor, we're prepared to offer you $15,000 to sign away your rights to this property. That's more than generous considering the questionable validity of your claim." I'd done my homework. The expansion project was budgeted at $2 million. $15,000 was an insult. But more than that, something about Sharon's tone made me want to dig my heels in. She wasn't asking. She was telling me what she thought I was worth. "I'll need to think about it," I said. Sharon's expression hardened. "Mr. Roswell, This community has invested considerable time and money into this project. We need an answer by the end of the week." "Then I guess you'll have my answer by the end of the week," I said, standing up. "Thanks for inviting me." I left while the room erupted in angry whispers behind me. In the parking lot, a woman in her 40s with dark hair caught up with me. "Hey, wait up," she called. "I'm Rachel Mendez. I live here, but I'm not on the board." "Okay," I said cautiously. "Look, I just wanted to warn you," Rachel said, glancing back at the building. "Sharon doesn't take no for an answer. She's been president here for 6 years, and she's turned this place into her personal kingdom. If you don't give her what she wants, she'll make your life hell." "I don't live here," I pointed out. "Do you live anywhere in Maricopa County?" Rachel asked. I nodded. Then trust me, she'll find a way. Sharon has connections everywhere. Her husband is a county supervisor, her brother-in-law is a judge, and her best friend works for the Arizona Republic. She's not just some HOA busybody, she's got real power." I thought about that on the drive home. Part of me wanted to just sign whatever they wanted and take the money. I didn't need the headache. But another part of me, the part that had spent years dealing with corporate managers and entitled tech bros, hated the idea of letting Sharon Patterson push me around. The next letter arrived from Desert Bloom Estates, signed by their HOA president, Linda Hartwell. This one was less polite. It informed me that they considered my air rights claim to be fraudulent and that they would be proceeding with their construction project regardless of my objections. If I had any legal concerns, I was welcome to file suit. I called Gerald again. "Can they do that?" "They can try," Gerald said, "but if they start building without your permission, you can get an immediate injunction and sue them for damages. I'd actually love it if they tried. The case would be open and shut." The third letter came from Pinnacle Ridge, and this one was different. Their president, Margaret Chen, requested a private meeting at a coffee shop in Scottsdale. No board members, no lawyers, just a conversation. I agreed, mostly because I was curious. Margaret turned out to be a woman in her 60s with gray hair and kind eyes. We met at a Starbucks on a Wednesday morning. She ordered a latte and insisted on paying for my coffee. "I'm not going to lie to you, Trevor," Margaret said once we sat down. "This situation is complicated. Our community has been planning a second-story addition to our recreation center for 2 years. We've got funding from our reserves, and we really need the space. Our community is aging, and we want to add an elevator and some accessibility features." "That sounds reasonable," I said. "But I also understand that you own something valuable," Margaret continued. "And I'm not going to insult you with a lowball offer or threaten you with lawyers. What would it take for you to sign off on our project?" I appreciated her directness. "Honestly, I don't know yet. I'm still trying to figure out what these rights are actually worth." Margaret nodded. "That's fair. Here's what I can tell you. We budgeted $75,000 as a contingency fund for unexpected expenses. I'm authorized to offer you $50,000 of that if you'll sign the release for our property. I think that's fair market value for what you're giving up." 50,000 was a lot more than 15, but I wasn't sure if it was enough. "Can I think about it?" "Of course," Margaret said. "Take your time. We're not breaking ground until next spring anyway." Over the next week, I did more research. I contacted a real estate appraiser who specialized in development rights. She explained that the value of air rights varied wildly depending on location and development potential. In Manhattan, air rights could sell for millions. In Phoenix, the market was less established. But given that I controlled rights over 3 separate properties, each with active construction plans, I was sitting on something potentially valuable. The appraiser suggested that each property's rights could reasonably be valued between $75,000 and $150,000, depending on the size and scope of the planned construction. That meant I was looking at somewhere between $225,000 and $450,000 total if I played this right. I decided to counter-offer. I sent letters to all 3 HOAs. To Margaret at Pinnacle Ridge, I said I'd accept $75,000. To Linda at Desert Bloom Estates, I requested $90,000 and an apology for the hostile letter. To Sharon at Saguaro Heights, I asked for $125,000 and a public acknowledgement of my rights. Margaret agreed immediately. Her response was gracious and professional. She sent over a contract within 3 days, and we scheduled a closing for the following month. Linda sent back a letter calling me a greedy opportunist, but ultimately agreed to the $90,000 minus the apology. Fine by me. Sharon lost her mind. She showed up at my apartment on a Saturday morning, somehow having obtained my address. I opened the door to find her standing there with a man in an expensive suit. "Mr. Roswell," Sharon said coldly, "this is my attorney, David Kensington. We're here to inform you that Saguaro Heights will not be extorted by a con artist making fraudulent claims." "Good morning to you too," I said. "And they're not fraudulent. Every document has been verified by the county." "We don't care," Sharon snapped. "We're filing suit against you for attempted fraud and extortion. We're also filing a complaint with the state attorney general's office. By the time we're done with you, you'll wish you'd never heard of Saguaro Heights." The lawyer, David, looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Patterson, perhaps we should discuss this more calmly." "I'm perfectly calm," Sharon said, though her face was red and her hands were shaking. "This man is trying to steal from our community. He's trying to hold us hostage over some made-up paperwork from 70 years ago." "The paperwork isn't made up," I said, "and I'm not trying to steal anything. I own something, and you want to buy it. That's how transactions work." $125,000 is robbery," Sharon said. "Your project is budgeted at over $2 million, I countered. "I'm asking for less than 6% of your total budget. That's reasonable." "We're done here," Sharon said, turning on her heel. "You'll be hearing from our lawyers." She stormed off. David the lawyer lingered for a moment. "Mr. Roswell, off the record, do you have documentation proving these air rights?" "Boxes of it," I said, "all filed with the county, all verified by multiple attorneys." David sighed. "Then Mrs. Patterson is making a mistake, but she's the client. Good luck." The lawsuit arrived 2 weeks later. Saguaro Heights, HOA, was suing me for fraud, claiming that my air rights were invalid due to improper filing procedures in 1947. They were also claiming that I was engaging in extortion by demanding excessive payment for a worthless claim. I hired my own attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Russo, who specialized in property law. She read through the lawsuit and actually laughed. "This is garbage," Patricia said. "They don't have a case. The filing procedures in 1947 were different from today, but your great-grandfather followed them correctly. And asking for fair market value isn't extortion. If anything, they're trying to intimidate you into giving up." "So what do?" I asked. "We file a motion to dismiss, and then we countersue for legal fees and harassment," Patricia said. "And we document everything, every threat, every attempt at intimidation. If they want to play hardball, we'll show them what hardball looks like." While the lawsuit ground through the courts, I closed the deals with Pinnacle Ridge and Desert Bloom Estates. Margaret was professional and pleasant throughout. Linda was cold and hostile, but honored the agreement. I suddenly had $165,000 in my bank account, minus legal fees and taxes. It was life-changing money. But Saguaro Heights wasn't done. Sharon Patterson launched a campaign to destroy my reputation. Articles started appearing in local papers about opportunistic scammers exploiting HOAs. My name wasn't mentioned directly, but anyone who knew about the situation could connect the dots. I started getting angry calls and emails from Saguaro Heights residents who'd been told I was the reason their community center expansion was delayed. Then, things got worse. I came home one evening to find my car had been keyed in the parking lot. The word "thief" was scratched into the driver's side door. I filed a police report, but without video evidence or witnesses, there wasn't much they could do. A week later, I got a call from my boss. Someone had filed a complaint with our company's HR department, claiming I was engaging in illegal business activities. It was anonymous, but the complaint included specific details about the air rights situation. I had to spend 2 hours explaining everything to HR and providing documentation to prove I wasn't doing anything illegal. Patricia told me to start keeping a detailed log of every incident. "This is harassment," she said, "and if we can prove it's coming from the HOA or Sharon personally, we can expand our countersuit." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Rachel Mendez, the woman who'd warned me in the parking lot after my first HOA meeting, called me out of the blue. "I need to talk to you," Rachel said, "in person, somewhere not in Saguaro Heights." We met at a diner in Tempe. Rachel looked nervous, glancing around as if she expected Sharon to materialize from thin air. "I'm violating about 6 HOA rules by talking to you," Rachel said, "but I can't stay silent anymore. Sharon is out of control. She's been using HOA funds to hire a private investigator to dig up dirt on you. She's also been organizing residents to harass you. There are group chats where people share information about your movements, your workplace, everything." "That's insane," I said. "Why would she go this far?" "Because you said no," Rachel explained. "Sharon has been president for 6 years, and in that time, nobody has ever successfully stood up to her. She's bullied residents into selling their homes, forced people off the board, even got someone fired from their job because they opposed her on some landscaping issue. You're not just threatening her construction project, you're threatening her power." "Do you have proof of any of this?" I asked. Rachel pulled out her phone. "I screenshot everything, the group chats, the emails, the budget documents showing the PI payments. I'm risking getting sued myself by showing you this, but someone needs to stop her." She sent me everything. Pages and pages of screenshots showing Sharon coordinating harassment campaigns, authorizing payments to private investigators, using HOA funds meant for community maintenance, and even discussing ways to make Trevor Roswell's life miserable until he gives up. I forwarded everything to Patricia, who called me within an hour, practically shouting with excitement. "This is gold," Patricia said. "This is criminal harassment, misuse of HOA funds, conspiracy. Trevor, we're not just going to win this case, we're going to bury them." Patricia filed an amended countersuit including claims of harassment, stalking, and misappropriation of HOA funds. She also sent a letter to the Arizona Attorney General's office and the Maricopa County Attorney suggesting they investigate Sharon Patterson and the Saguaro Heights HOA board for potential criminal activity. The response was swift. Within a week, David Kensington, Sharon's lawyer, called Patricia requesting a meeting to discuss settlement. Sharon's husband, the county supervisor, suddenly announced he wouldn't be seeking re-election, and Sharon herself stopped showing up to HOA meetings. We met for settlement negotiations at Patricia's office. Sharon looked diminished somehow, her previous confidence replaced with barely concealed panic. David did most of the talking. "My clients are prepared to offer $200,000 to resolve this matter completely," David said. "That includes signing over the air rights and dropping all claims against the HOA." $250,000, Patricia countered, plus full reimbursement of Mr. Roswell's legal fees, which currently total $18,000, plus a public apology from Mrs. Patterson and the HOA board, plus Mrs. Patterson's resignation as HOA president, and we want an independent audit of HOA finances for the past 3 years to ensure all misappropriated funds are returned to the community. Sharon's face went white. "That's outrageous." "What's outrageous is using community funds to harass a private citizen," Patricia said calmly. "What's outrageous is organizing stalking campaigns and property damage. You're lucky we're settling instead of pressing for criminal charges." David whispered urgently with Sharon for several minutes. Finally, Sharon nodded, looking defeated. "Fine," David said. "We accept your terms." The settlement took 3 weeks to finalize. Sharon Patterson resigned as HOA president in a terse letter that made no mention of the reasons why. The HOA issued a public apology acknowledging that they had made errors in judgment regarding their dealings with Mr. Trevor Roswell and his legitimate property rights. The independent audit revealed that Sharon had misappropriated nearly $60,000 in HOA funds over 3 years for personal expenses, private investigators, and what she'd classified as legal consulting. The Saguaro Heights community went into an uproar when the audit results were published. Several residents filed a class action lawsuit against Sharon personally to recover the stolen funds. The county attorney's office opened a criminal investigation into potential embezzlement and fraud. 6 months after I'd first learned about my inheritance, I received a check for $250,000, plus $18,000 for legal fees. Combined with the money from the other 2 HOAs, I'd made over $430,000 from air rights I hadn't known existed a year earlier. But the story didn't end there. Rachel Mendez called me one last time, inviting me to a special HOA meeting at Saguaro Heights. The community had elected a new board, and they wanted to thank me personally. I almost didn't go. I'd had enough of HOA meetings to last a lifetime, but curiosity got the better of me. The community center was packed. The new HOA president, a friendly man named Carlos Rodriguez, stood at the podium. When I walked in, people actually applauded. It was surreal. "Mr. Roswell," Carlos said, shaking my hand, "on behalf of the Saguaro Heights community, I want to thank you. Your lawsuit exposed corruption that had been poisoning our neighborhood for years. Because of you, we've recovered stolen funds, elected a new board committed to transparency, and learned valuable lessons about oversight and accountability." "I was just protecting my property rights," I said, feeling uncomfortable with the attention. "You did more than that," Rachel said from the audience. "You showed us that nobody is above the rules, not even HOA presidents with powerful connections." They presented me with a plaque, which was touching if completely unnecessary. Then they gave me a tour of the completed community center expansion. It was beautiful, with a new second story featuring a fitness center, a library, and a community room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the desert. "None of this would have happened if you'd just given in to Sharon's demands," Carlos said. "She would have built what she wanted, continued embezzling funds, and nobody would have known the difference. You forced transparency, and we're all better for it." As I drove home that evening, I thought about my great-grandfather and his strange investment in air rights back in 1947. He'd probably never imagined that his speculative purchase would lead to all this. But in a weird way, those old property rights had done more than just make me money. They'd exposed corruption, held powerful people accountable, and reminded an entire community that rules applied to everyone. The legal system had worked the way it was supposed to. Sharon Patterson's trial date was set for the following spring on charges of embezzlement and fraud. Her husband had quietly resigned from his county position. David Kensington had been reprimanded by the state bar for ethical violations related to his role in the harassment campaign. I used some of my settlement money to take a long vacation, traveling through Montana and Wyoming, hiking in places where nobody cared about HOAs or air rights or property disputes. When I got back, I found one last letter waiting for me. It was from Margaret Chen at Pinnacle Ridge. Inside was a thank you note and a photo of their completed community center expansion. The new second story was beautiful, with the accessibility features they'd wanted and a rooftop garden that residents had added as a bonus. Margaret wrote that their community had learned from Saguaro Heights' mistakes and had implemented new oversight procedures to ensure their board remained accountable. I pinned the photo to my refrigerator, a reminder of what happened when people acted with integrity instead of entitlement. My software development job suddenly felt boring after months of legal drama, but I threw myself back into it with renewed focus. I invested most of my settlement money wisely, keeping some aside for emergencies and future opportunities. I wasn't rich by any means, but I was comfortable in ways I'd never been before. The Phoenix real estate market kept growing, and occasionally I'd drive past one of the 3 communities where I'd once owned the air above their buildings. Life continued there. People came and went. HOAs held meetings and made decisions. But now at least one of those communities operated with greater transparency and accountability. About a year after everything was resolved, I got a call from a real estate investor in Tucson. He'd heard about my air rights case and wanted to know if I had any advice. A similar situation was developing there, with old mining claims creating unexpected property complications. "Document everything," I told him. "Hire a good property lawyer. Don't let anyone bully you into accepting less than fair value. And if they start playing dirty, make sure you're recording every single thing they do." "Did you ever regret it?" he asked. "Fighting instead of just taking the money and walking away?" I thought about that. The stress had been enormous. I'd lost sleep, gained gray hairs, and spent months looking over my shoulder. But I'd also learned that I was stronger than I thought, that standing up for yourself mattered, that powerful people couldn't always get what they wanted just because they were used to getting their way. "No," I said, "I don't regret it at all." The investor thanked me and hung up. I went back to my normal life, the one where I wrote code and argued about framework updates and worried about normal things like whether I'd paid my electric bill. But sometimes, late at night, I'd pull out the old leather folder that Gerald had given me, the one with all the original documents from my great-grandfather. I'd read through the faded paperwork, trying to understand what he'd been thinking when he made that investment in 1947. Maybe he'd just been speculating, hoping to make a quick profit. Or maybe he'd understood something about property and rights and the long game that most people missed. Either way, his decision had rippled forward through decades, eventually landing in my lap and changing my life in ways nobody could have predicted. The American dream was supposed to be about working hard and building something for yourself and your family. My great-grandfather had done that in his own strange way, and without even knowing it, he'd given me a gift that went beyond money. He'd given me the opportunity to stand up for myself, to fight back against people who thought their power made them untouchable, and to win. I kept in touch with Rachel Mendez. She'd become something of a hero in Saguaro Heights, the whistleblower who'd helped expose the corruption. She told me stories about the new HOA board, how they'd implemented term limits for officers, required quarterly financial reports available to all residents, and created an oversight committee to review any expenditure over $5,000. "It's not perfect," Rachel said during one of our coffee meetups. "HOAs never are. There's still petty drama about landscaping and parking and whose fence is the wrong shade of beige. But at least now there's accountability. People pay attention. They ask questions. Sharon taught us all a valuable lesson about what happens when you give one person too much power." Sharon's trial had concluded 3 months earlier. She'd been convicted of embezzlement and fraud, sentenced to 18 months in prison followed by probation, and ordered to make full restitution to the HOA. Her fall from neighborhood queen to convicted felon had been absolute and swift. I felt no satisfaction in her punishment, just a quiet relief that justice had been served. The legal precedent from our case had attracted attention from property rights advocates across Arizona. Patricia Russo had been interviewed by several legal publications about the case, and law schools were using it as a teaching example in property law classes. My weird inheritance had become a footnote in Arizona legal history. I never did find out exactly why my great-grandfather had purchased those specific air rights. Gerald had searched through his records but found no documents explaining the reasoning. Maybe it had been random. Maybe he'd had specific plans that never materialized. The mystery of it appealed to me, the idea that sometimes you take actions whose consequences won't be known for decades. One afternoon, I drove out to the Desert Bloom Estates community, the one where Linda Hartwell had been president. Their expansion was complete too, a modest second story that matched the architectural style of the original building. I didn't go inside, just sat in my car in the parking lot looking at it. A security guard knocked on my window. "Can I help you, sir?" "No, sorry," I said. "I was just looking. I used to be involved with this place." "You lived here?" the guard asked. "Not exactly," I said. "It's complicated." I drove away, leaving Desert Bloom Estates in my rearview mirror. That was the thing about property rights, about ownership and legacy. You could own something without ever living there, could affect a place without ever belonging to it. My great-grandfather had touched these communities from beyond the grave. I'd changed them without ever calling them home. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work, friends, hobbies, the normal activities of a 33-year-old software developer in Phoenix. But I'd changed in subtle ways. I paid more attention to contracts now, read the fine print, understood that legal documents weren't just boring paperwork, but instruments of power and protection. I voted in local elections, served on a nonprofit board, engaged with my community in ways I never had before. The money from the settlements was invested conservatively, generating enough passive income to give me options I'd never had. I could take time off if I wanted, travel, maybe start my own company someday. The security that came with financial breathing room changed how I thought about the future. But more than the money, the experience had taught me about power and how it worked. Sharon Patterson had wielded power through intimidation, connections, and the assumption that nobody would challenge her. She'd been effective right up until someone called her bluff. That lesson stuck with me. Power was often more fragile than it appeared. 2 years after inheriting the air rights, I sold my apartment and bought a house in Chandler. It was a quiet neighborhood with no HOA, which was absolutely intentional. I'd had enough of homeowner associations to last several lifetimes. My real estate agent had laughed when I'd made that a firm requirement. "You'd be surprised how many people say that," she'd told me. "HOAs can be great when they're run well, but when they go bad, they go really bad." I didn't tell her my story. It felt too complicated to explain, and besides, I was trying to move forward rather than dwelling on the past. The house needed work, but it was mine without restrictions or boards or presidents who thought they could tell me what color to paint my mailbox. I spent weekends fixing it up, learning home repair skills I'd never needed as a renter. There was something satisfying about working with my hands, seeing physical progress. Gerald called me on the 3-year anniversary of our first meeting, the one where he'd handed me that leather folder. "Trevor, I wanted to check in," he said. "How are you doing?" "Good," I said. "Really good, actually. The whole thing was crazy, but it worked out." "Your grandfather would be proud," Gerald said. "He always said his father was a clever man who thought differently from everyone else. I think you proved that the apple didn't fall far from the tree." "I just protected what was mine," I said. "That's harder than it sounds," Gerald replied. "Most people would have caved to the pressure. You stood your ground." After we hung up, I went into my home office and looked at the framed plaque that Saguaro Heights had given me. It was cheesy and over the top, but it meant something, not because of the words engraved on it, but because of what it represented. A community had been broken and had fixed itself. I'd been the catalyst, but they'd done the actual work. I thought about writing a book about the experience, but decided against it. The story was too specific, too weird. Nobody would believe that someone could inherit air rights and end up bringing down a corrupt HOA president. It sounded like fiction. Instead, I focused on the present. I dated, made new friends, traveled when I could. I volunteered with a legal aid organization that helped low-income residents fight unfair housing practices. Patricia Russo had connected me with them, and I found satisfaction in using my experience to help others navigate similar situations. The work was mostly boring, reading through documents and helping people understand their rights. But occasionally, there'd be a case that reminded me of my own battle. Someone being bullied by a landlord or an HOA, someone who didn't have the resources to fight back. I'd share my story, give them advice, connect them with lawyers who could help. One case particularly stood out. A single mother named Jennifer was being fined thousands of dollars by her HOA for violations she hadn't committed. The HOA president, a woman named Brenda, who reminded me uncomfortably of Sharon Patterson, had decided Jennifer didn't fit the community's standards and was systematically harassing her into leaving. I helped Jennifer document everything, connected her with Patricia Russo, and even testified about HOA abuse patterns during the legal proceedings. Jennifer won her case, the fines were dismissed, and Brenda was removed from the HOA board. It felt like the air rights battle all over again, except this time I was helping someone else fight. "Thank you," Jennifer told me after it was over, tears in her eyes. "I thought I was going to lose my home. You saved me." "You saved yourself," I said. "I just showed you the tools you needed." That became my approach to helping others. I couldn't fight everyone's battles, but I could teach them how to fight their own. I gave talks at community centers about property rights and HOA governance. I wrote articles for local publications about accountability and oversight. I became a minor expert on something I'd never wanted to learn about in the first place. 4 years after the settlement, I got an email from Carlos Rodriguez, the Saguaro Heights president who'd replaced Sharon. The community was celebrating its 5th anniversary of reformed governance, as they called it, and they wanted to invite me to the celebration. I almost declined. It felt strange to celebrate something that had been so stressful at the time, but Rachel convinced me to go. The celebration was held at the community center, the building that had been at the center of everything. The second story looked great, well-maintained and actively used. Residents had decorated it with banners and balloons. It felt like a block party. Carlos gave a speech about the importance of transparency and accountability. Several residents talked about how the community had changed for the better. Rachel shared her story about deciding to become a whistleblower, the fear she'd felt, and the satisfaction when justice prevailed. Then Carlos called me to the podium. I hadn't prepared anything to say. "I'm not much for speeches," I started. When this all began, I was just trying to understand what I'd inherited. I didn't set out to expose corruption or reform an HOA. I just wanted to be treated fairly. I looked out at the crowd, saw Rachel nodding encouragingly. But I learned something important, I continued. Communities are only as good as the people who participate in them. For years, residents here let Sharon Patterson do whatever she wanted because it was easier than challenging her. When people finally started paying attention, asking questions, demanding accountability, everything changed. That's the real lesson. Democracy doesn't work if people don't participate. The applause was generous, probably more than my rambling speech deserved. Afterward, several residents came up to thank me, share their own stories, tell me how the community had improved. It was gratifying in ways I hadn't expected. On the drive home, I thought about how strange life was. 4 years ago, I'd been a regular guy with a regular job and no particular ambitions beyond paying rent and enjoying my hobbies. Then, I'd inherited something I'd never heard of, and it had changed everything. Not just financially, though the money was nice, but it had changed how I saw the world, how I understood power and rights and the importance of standing up for yourself. The inheritance had been random chance, a genetic lottery that put those air rights in my hands. But what I'd done with them, that had been my choice. I could have taken Sharon's first offer and walked away. Nobody would have blamed me. Instead, I'd fought, and that fight had rippled outward, affecting hundreds of people I'd never met. My phone rang. It was Patricia Russo. "Trevor, I've got an interesting situation," she said. "There's a developer in Mesa who claims to own mineral rights under a residential neighborhood. The HOA is freaking out. The guy needs advice from someone who's been through something similar. Interested?" I almost said no. I'd had enough drama to last a lifetime. But then I thought about Jennifer and the other people I'd helped, about how my weird experience had given me knowledge that could actually be useful. "Sure," I said. "Have him call me." Because that was the thing about inheriting something strange and unexpected. It wasn't just about what you got, it was about what you did with it. My great-grandfather had purchased air rights in 1947, probably hoping to make a profit. He'd passed them to my grandfather, who'd passed them to me, and I'd turned them into something more than just a financial transaction. I'd turned them into justice, accountability, and change. I'd learned to fight back against bullies, to understand systems of power, to help others navigate impossible situations. The air rights were long gone, signed away to 3 different HOAs. But the lessons remained, valuable in ways that couldn't be measured in dollars. As I pulled into my driveway, I looked at my house, my property, the thing that was mine with no HOA to tell me what to do with it. Freedom had a price, and sometimes that price was standing up for yourself even when it was hard, even when powerful people tried to make you back down. I'd paid that price, and I'd won. Not just money, though there was plenty of that. But something more important. Self-respect. The knowledge that I could face down bullies and win. The understanding that one person really could make a difference. That night, I pulled out the old leather folder one more time. Inside were the original documents, yellowed with age, bearing my great-grandfather's signature. I wondered if he'd had any idea what he was starting when he purchased those air rights 78 years ago. Probably not. Nobody could predict how property rights purchased in 1947 would lead to exposing HOA corruption in 2024. But that was the beauty of it. You made choices, took actions, and the consequences rippled forward through time in ways you couldn't imagine. My great-grandfather had given me an unexpected gift. Not just the air rights themselves, but the opportunity to become someone stronger, braver, more engaged with the world. I'd been a passive person before all this, someone who avoided conflict and kept his head down. The battle with Sharon Patterson in Saguaro Heights had forced me to find courage I didn't know I had. I carefully put the documents back in the folder and returned it to its place on my bookshelf, next to the plaque from Saguaro Heights and a framed photo of the 3 community centers I'd helped shape without ever living in them. Tomorrow I'd talk to the Mesa developer about his mineral rights situation. Next week I had a volunteer shift at the legal aid clinic. Next month I was giving a talk at a community college about property rights and civic engagement. My life had become something I'd never planned or expected. But isn't that how life worked? You inherited things, random and strange. You made choices about what to do with them. And those choices defined who you became. I'd inherited air rights above 3 HOA buildings in Phoenix, Arizona. I'd turned that inheritance into accountability, justice, and change. And in doing so, I'd discovered that I was capable of far more than I'd ever imagined. The air above those buildings belonged to the HOAs now. They'd paid fair prices for it. But the experience belonged to me, and nobody could take that away. It was mine to keep, to learn from, to use, to help others. That was worth more than any amount of money. That was the real inheritance, the one that mattered. Not property rights purchased in 1947, but the strength to stand up for those rights, the courage to face down corruption, and the satisfaction of knowing that justice could still prevail. I turned off the lights and went to bed, content with the strange journey that had brought me here, grateful for a great-grandfather I'd never met who'd given me the opportunity to become the person I was meant to be. The air rights were gone, but their legacy remained. In reformed HOAs, in helped residents, in lessons learned and taught. My great-grandfather had bought the sky above Phoenix neighborhoods decades ago. I'd used that purchase to bring some small piece of justice to earth, and that, I thought, as sleep claimed me, was inheritance enough.